In 1595 before Christ, an army marched 800 kilometers from a mountain fortress in central Anatolia, crossed the Euphrates, and sacked Babylon itself. Then they vanished from history for 3,000 years, buried beneath the rubble of their own burned capital, until a German archaeologist pulled 10,000 clay tablets from the earth and revealed an empire that had once rivaled Egypt, pioneered the world's first peace treaty, and worshipped 1,000 gods. This is the story of the Hittites. What follows is the complete journey. From the ancient Hatti people who first carved civilization into the volcanic highlands of Anatolia, through the arrival of mysterious Indo-European migrants who fused with them to forge a new identity. From the first kings who built fortress cities on cursed ground, through palace assassinations and succession crises that nearly destroyed the state before it began. From the rise of Suppiluliuma the Great, who dismantled rival kingdoms and made the Hittites masters of the ancient Near East, to the day of chariots at Kadesh, where 50,000 soldiers clashed along the Orontes River. From the extraordinary peace that followed, sealed in silver and preserved in 2 languages, to the final catastrophe that swept the Bronze Age world into darkness around 1180 before Christ, and beyond into the successor kingdoms that kept Hittite memory alive for 5 more centuries. A replica of their peace treaty hangs today in the United Nations headquarters. Their sun disk adorns modern Turkish civic emblems. They wrote laws granting women rights to divorce and own property 3 millennia ago. This civilization shaped diplomacy, governance, and religious tolerance in ways the modern world still inherits. If you enjoy complete journeys through the rise and fall of civilizations, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Each week we bring you the full story of a world that shaped history. Let us begin where all empires begin, not with kings, but with the land itself. The Anatolian plateau rises from the earth like a fortress built by geology itself. Volcanic peaks, Erciyes, Hasan, the long dormant cones of Cappadocia, stand sentinel over a landscape carved by millennia of wind, frost, and flowing water. Between them stretches a vast highland steppe, 1,100 meters above the sea, ringed by mountain chains that trap winter snows and channel summer meltwater into rivers, cutting deep valleys through soft tufa and harder basalt. The greatest of these rivers, the Kızılırmak, bends in an enormous arc through the heart of the plateau, enclosing a territory of rolling grassland and sheltered basins where human communities have gathered since the earliest experiments with agriculture. This is the land that will one day be called Hatti, not yet for any empire, but for the people who first gave it a name. By the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, the Hatti have built a civilization of quiet sophistication across central Anatolia. They speak a language unrelated to any known family, neither Semitic nor Indo-European, and they organize themselves into city-states governed by rulers whose power rests on control of sacred ritual and metal wealth. At Alakahoyuk, northeast of the great river bend, their dead lie in stone-lined shaft graves covered with timber and earth. Above the bones rest extraordinary objects, bronze standards shaped as stags with sweeping antlers, solar discs ringed with radiating prongs, bull figurines cast in copper and wrapped in gold leaf. These are not mere ornaments. They are the material vocabulary of a religious world, symbols of celestial power, animal spirits, and the authority of those who mediate between the living and the divine. The Hatti build in mud brick on stone foundations. Their settlements cluster around temple precincts, where priests maintain sacred fires and offer grain, meat, and libations to gods whose names will survive into later centuries, absorbed by conquerors who recognize their power. The storm god of the land, the sun goddess who watches over the earth, the protective deity of the wild animals, these divine figures already inhabit the Anatolian sacred landscape, waiting for the peoples who will carry them into imperial religion. Then, around 1950 years before the Common Era, a new presence appears. Merchants from the city of Assur, far to the southeast in northern Mesopotamia, establish a network of trading colonies across Anatolia. They call these settlements Karum. The word means port, or quay, a commercial district set outside the walls of the local city. The greatest of these colonies rises at Kadesh, modern Kultepe, in the shadow of Mount Erciyes. Here, Assyrian traders build their houses of mud brick, store their goods in sealed rooms, and conduct business through an intricate system of cuneiform correspondence, pressed into small clay tablets and sealed inside clay envelopes. More than 23,000 of these tablets survive, an astonishing archive of commercial life. They record shipments of tin from the east and textiles from Assur, exchanged for Anatolian silver and gold. Donkey caravans cross mountain passes carrying loads measured to the mina. Contracts specify interest rates, partnership terms, and penalties for default. Letters between merchants and their wives reveal family tensions, debts owed, profits shared. This is no primitive barter economy. It is a sophisticated international trading system linking Mesopotamia to the Anatolian highlands, with Kadesh as its central node. The Hatti rulers permit and profit from this trade. They levy taxes on goods passing through their territories. They purchase tin, essential for alloying copper into bronze, and thereby arm their soldiers and adorn their temples. The plateau sits at the crossroads of the ancient world. Mesopotamia to the southeast, the Aegean coast to the west, the Caucasus to the northeast, Egypt far to the south beyond the Taurus passes. Whoever controls this highland controls the flow of metal, textile, and grain between civilizations. For 2 centuries, the Karum system thrives. Generations of Assyrian merchants live among the Hatti, learning local customs, sometimes marrying local women. The cuneiform script they use will outlast their commercial presence, becoming the administrative tool of kingdoms not yet born. And somewhere beyond the mountain passes, new peoples are moving, speakers of an Indo-European tongue, filtering into Anatolia in small groups, settling among the Hatti, learning their gods and their sacred places. The plateau waits, patient as the stone beneath its soil, for the transformation that is coming. They come not as a single army, but as a slow tide, families, clans, small bands of herders moving with their livestock through the high passes where snow lingers into late spring. Over generations, beginning around 2,000 years before the Common Era, speakers of an Indo-European tongue filter into the Anatolian heartland. Their language, which later texts will call Nesili, the speech of the city of Nisa, carries words for horse, wheel, and yoke that mark them as people of the steppe margin, familiar with movement across vast distances. Whether they crossed the Caucasus from the north or filtered through the Balkans and across the narrow straits to the west remains uncertain. What is clear is that they did not conquer in a single stroke. They settled among the Hatti, village by village, valley by valley, absorbing the sacred landscape they found. the plateau receives them as it has received others. The newcomers learn the names of local gods, adopt the rituals performed at sacred springs and mountain peaks, and begin to speak of the storm god and the sun goddess in their own grammatical structures while preserving Hattic invocations in religious ceremonies. A cultural fusion unfolds across centuries, not the erasure of one people by another, but a layering, a blending of Indo-European social structures with indigenous Anatolian sacred traditions. The Nesili speakers bring patrilineal kingship concepts and warrior aristocracy. The Hatti contribute 1,000 years of accumulated religious knowledge, architectural tradition, and connection to the land itself. By the 18th century before the Common Era, this fusion has produced something new. City-states across central Anatolia are ruled by kings bearing both Hattic and Nesili names. At Kusara, a dynasty emerges that will reshape the political landscape. King Pithana of Kusara conquers the city of Nesa, the ancient Kadesh where Assyrian merchants once traded, around 1750 before the Common Era. His son Anita inherits this conquest and expands it with extraordinary ambition. The text that bears Anita's name, inscribed in Nesili on a cuneiform tablet found centuries later at Hattusa, stands as the oldest known document in the Hittite language. In it, Anita declares his victories over rival city-states, his capture of their kings, his accumulation of tribute in cattle, sheep, silver, and gold. Anita's campaigns carry him north to the city of Hattusa, seat of a rival king named Piusti. He takes the city, raises its fortifications, and sows weeds upon its ground. The curse he pronounces is absolute. Whoever rebuilds Hattusa and reigns there shall face the wrath of the storm god. Bronze weapons from this era, recovered from palace storerooms at Kadesh, show the military technology of these early kings. Socketed spearheads, flanged axes, daggers with crescent-shaped pommels. Royal seals pressed into clay bullae display early hieroglyphic signs alongside cuneiform, a bilingual administrative world taking shape. At Kadesh, Anita builds a palace complex whose foundations reveal rooms for storage, audience, and ritual. Lion and bull imagery marks the threshold, symbols of royal power that will persist for 5 centuries of Hittite kingship. The city thrums with multilingual life. Hattic priests chant in the old tongue. Nesili-speaking administrators dictate to scribes trained in Mesopotamian cuneiform. Hurrian merchants from the southeast bring their own language into the mix. This is not a monolithic state, but a polyglot world held together by the personal power of warrior kings and the shared reverence for gods whose names cross every linguistic boundary. After Anita, the historical record dims. A gap of perhaps a century separates his reign from the next clearly documented dynasty. The kingdom of Kusara continues, but its rulers leave few traces that survive. Somewhere in this obscurity the political center shifts. The curse upon Hattusa will not hold forever. A future king will look upon that rocky citadel, its commanding position above the river valley, its natural defenses on 3 sides, and decide that strategic advantage outweighs any ancient malediction. The foundations of empire are being laid in these generations of silence, in the slow consolidation of Nesili-speaking dynasties, in the administrative habits learned from cuneiform tradition, in the religious synthesis that gives these kings legitimacy over both newcomer and native. The plateau's transformation from a patchwork of competing city-states into a unified kingdom awaits only the right ambition, the right moment, and the right king willing to defy a curse. The king who defies the curse bears the name of the city itself. Hattusili, meaning the one from Hattusa, claims the abandoned citadel sometime around 1650 before the Common Era, and in doing so transforms a cursed ruin into the seat of a dynasty. The rocky promontory of Buyukale rises above the surrounding terrain like a natural throne. Sheer cliffs on 3 sides, a commanding view across the river valley below, and enough elevation to spot approaching enemies from a day's march away. Whatever spiritual prohibition Anita had placed upon this ground, Hattusili judges the strategic calculus more compelling than any ancient malediction. He builds. The first fortification walls rise along the citadel's accessible southern approach, massive stones fitted without mortar, their cyclopean weight a statement of permanence. Within this perimeter, a palace complex takes shape. Administrative buildings where scribes press cuneiform into wet clay, storage magazines for grain and tribute, and audience halls where the king receives vassals and dispenses judgment. Hattusa is not merely a fortress. It becomes the administrative heart of a kingdom consolidating its grip across central Anatolia, a capital whose archives will eventually number in the tens of thousands of tablets. Hattusili I proves himself not only a builder, but a conqueror of extraordinary reach. His armies push south through the Taurus mountain passes, those narrow defiles where snow lingers into spring, and a single fortified position can halt an entire column. Beyond the mountains lies northern Syria, wealthy and fragmented, its city-states controlling the trade routes that link Mesopotamia to the Mediterranean coast. Hattusili strikes at Al-Alaq, destroys it, and turns his attention to the greatest prize in the region. Yamhad, the powerful kingdom centered on Aleppo. The conflict with Yamhad consumes years of campaigning. Hattusili wins battles but cannot take Aleppo itself, and the effort costs him dearly in men and political capital. Back in Hattusa, the king faces a crisis that will echo through Hittite history for generations, the question of succession. His own sons and nephews conspire against him. In a remarkable document known as his Political Testament, Hattusili disinherits his original heirs and names his grandson Mursili as successor. The text seethes with personal betrayal, naming those who plotted against the throne, and establishes the principle that the king's word alone determines succession. It is governance by decree, fragile and dependent entirely on the strength of the man who issues it. Mursili I inherits both the throne and his grandfather's unfinished war. Around 1595 before the Common Era, he accomplishes what seems almost impossible for a kingdom centered on the Anatolian plateau. His armies march south, finally conquering Aleppo and destroying the power of Yamhad. But Mursili does not stop. He continues down the Euphrates River Valley, 800 kilometers from his capital, and falls upon Babylon itself. The city of Hammurabi's heirs, the great cultural center of Mesopotamia, is sacked. The first dynasty of Babylon, already weakened, collapses entirely. Mursili's soldiers carry the statue of the god Marduk back toward Anatolia as spoil. The achievement is staggering in its ambition and reach. A kingdom barely a generation old as a unified state has projected military power across the entire breadth of the ancient Near East. Chariot forces and infantry have crossed mountain ranges, forded great rivers, and struck at the most storied city in Mesopotamia. Yet the very distance that makes this campaign legendary also makes it unsustainable. Morsili returns to Hattusa with plunder and glory, but the territories between cannot be held. The Euphrates Valley slips from Hittite control almost immediately. The campaign reveals both the extraordinary military capability of the early Hittite state and its fundamental limitation. Power radiates outward from Hattusa like heat from a fire, intense at the center, dissipating rapidly with distance. The kingdom possesses the offensive strength to shatter distant enemies, but lacks the administrative infrastructure to govern what it conquers. Syria remains contested ground. Babylon falls to the Kassites rather than remaining under Hittite dominion. The pattern will repeat across Hittite history. Spectacular military reach, followed by the slow contraction of actual control back toward the Anatolian heartland. For now, though, Hattusa stands triumphant, a cursed city reborn as the capital of conquerors whose chariots have rolled through the gates of Babylon itself. Morsili returns from Babylon in triumph, but the palace corridors that welcome him home are already thick with conspiracy. His brother-in-law Hantili and a nobleman named Zidanta, bound together by ambition and perhaps by blood, move against the young conqueror. The details remain fragmentary, preserved only in later texts that look back on this era with horror, but the outcome is unambiguous. Morsili I, the king who shattered Babylon, dies by assassination sometime around 1595 before the Common Era. The hand that strikes him down belongs to those closest to the throne. Hantili seizes power. The palace at Buyukala, perched on its rocky spur above the lower city, becomes the stage for a new kind of governance, one maintained not by legitimacy, but by vigilance. The throne room, with its plastered walls and central hearth, witnesses the first of many usurpers declaring themselves great king. Yet Hantili's reign brings no stability. The Syrian vassals, sensing weakness at the center, slip away. Aleppo reasserts its independence. The trade routes that once funneled wealth northward into Hatti begin to redirect. And the Kaska peoples, tribal groups inhabiting the forested mountains along the Black Sea coast to the north, sense opportunity in the kingdom's distraction. Their raids grow bolder, pressing against the northern frontier with increasing frequency. Then Zidanta turns on Hantili. The very conspirator who helped murder Morsili now murders Hantili's sons and grandsons, eventually seizing the throne for himself. The pattern crystallizes into something approaching ritual. Each new king rises through blood, rules in paranoia, and falls to the next ambitious kinsman. Zidanta himself is murdered by his own son Amuna. Amuna's reign brings further territorial losses. The Hittite domain contracts. The peripheral lands fall away like dried clay from a crumbling wall. When Amuna dies, his son Huzziya seizes power by eliminating rival claimants. The archive chambers of Hattusa grow sparse during these generations. Fewer tablets survive. Fewer royal inscriptions commemorate campaigns or building projects. Historians speak of a dark age, not because civilization collapses entirely, but because the internal violence so consumes the ruling class that the apparatus of record-keeping and administration deteriorates. The great fortification walls still stand, the temples still function, but the kingdom shrinks, its energy turned inward, consuming itself. Into this cycle of fratricide steps Telepinu, around 1500 before the Common Era. He comes to power through yet another coup, deposing Huzziya, but what distinguishes him from every predecessor is what he does afterward. Rather than simply ruling until the next knife finds him, Telepinu issues a proclamation that amounts to a constitutional revolution. The text, preserved on tablets discovered in the Hattusa archives, recounts the entire bloody history of succession since Hattusili I. It names the murders. It names the murderers. It traces the kingdom's decline directly to this political violence. Then Telepinu establishes law. The succession must pass from father to son, firstborn son of the first-ranking wife, then second son, then, if no sons exist, to the husband of the first-ranking daughter. No other path to the throne carries legitimacy. Those who violate this order face judgment not by assassination, but by the panchus, an assembly of nobles and dignitaries empowered to try even royal offenders. The punishment for regicide shall no longer be further regicide, but formal judicial process. The Telepinu Edict does not end all instability. The generations that follow still see tension and occasional violence, but it establishes a principle that will endure. Kingship in Hatti possesses rules. Power transfers through law rather than solely through blood. The panchus, though its exact composition and authority remain debated by scholars, represents something remarkable for the 16th century before the Common Era, a formal institutional check on royal power. After Telepinu, the kingdom enters its most obscure period. The kings who follow, Aluamna, Hantili II, Zidanta II, Huzziya II, are little more than names on fragmentary king lists. The cascades continue. Syria remains lost. The kingdom survives but does not expand, holding its Anatolian heartland through these quiet, undocumented decades. The great walls of Hattusa endure. The temples maintain their festivals. The scribes continue their work in diminished volume. Somewhere in this silence, the foundations are being laid for revival, for the new kingdom that will transform this battered highland state into an empire capable of challenging Egypt itself. The silence breaks around 1430 before the Common Era. A king named Tudaliya, the first or perhaps the second to bear that name, for the records remain tangled, ascends the throne of Hattusa and finds a realm diminished but not destroyed. The heartland endures. The granaries still fill each autumn. The chariot horses still breed on the plateau grasslands. What has been lost is reach, ambition, the capacity to project force beyond the mountain passes. Tudaliya intends to reclaim all of it. The transformation begins with bronze. In the foundries below the citadel of Buyukale, smiths work copper from Ergane and tin imported along routes stretching back to Afghanistan. They cast spearheads, axe blades, arrow points, and the fittings for a new generation of war chariots, heavier vehicles than before, designed to carry 3 men rather than 2, a driver, a shield-bearer, and a warrior armed with lance and bow. The workshops multiply. The chariot corps expands from hundreds to what later records suggest numbered over 1,000 vehicles. This is industrial mobilization on a scale the Anatolian plateau has never witnessed, a kingdom reforging itself into a military machine. Tudaliya turns first toward the west. The Azawa lands, a loose confederation of territories stretching toward the Aegean coast, have grown powerful during the decades of Hittite weakness. They control access to western trade routes, to the coastal ports where Aegean goods flow eastward. Tudaliya campaigns against them with systematic aggression, striking into the lands of Azawa Minor, the Seha River land, and territories whose names echo through later vassal treaties. He does not conquer them outright, but forces their submission, binding their rulers through a diplomatic instrument that will become the Hittite Empire's signature tool, the vassal treaty. These treaties are extraordinary documents. Inscribed on clay tablets in Akkadian cuneiform, the diplomatic language of the age, they follow a precise structure. A historical preamble establishes the relationship between the great king and the vassal. Stipulations define obligations, military support when called, extradition of fugitives, loyalty oaths, tribute payments. Divine witnesses from both pantheons guarantee enforcement. Curses for violation and blessings for compliance close the text. Each treaty is deposited in the vassal's temple, a sacred contract witnessed by the gods themselves. Through this system, the Hittites build an empire without garrisoning every city, a web of obligation radiating outward from Hattusa. But the greater challenge lies southeast, where the kingdom of Mitanni dominates northern Syria from its capital Washukani. Mitanni controls the very territories that Hattusili I and Mursili I once seized. Aleppo, the Euphrates crossings, the rich agricultural plains that feed armies. Tudhaliya probes this frontier, testing Mitanni's strength, establishing forward positions. The contest for Syria becomes the defining strategic struggle of the age, one that will consume Hittite energies for generations. Hattusa itself transforms physically during these decades. The old city on the northern slope no longer suffices. A massive expansion pushes the fortification circuit southward, eventually encompassing a perimeter of 6 kilometers, enormous for any Bronze Age city. The southern wall rises with cyclopean stone foundations topped by mud brick superstructure, punctuated by towers at regular intervals. The Yerkapa rampart, a great artificial glacis of packed earth faced with stone, creates an elevated southern boundary visible for kilometers across the plateau. New temples rise within the expanded circuit, dozens of them, housing the accumulated gods of every conquered and absorbed population. The copper trade from Alasia, the island later known as Cyprus, becomes strategically vital. Copper means bronze, bronze means weapons, weapons mean empire. Hittite diplomatic correspondence with Alasia's rulers grows insistent, demanding reliable shipments, offering grain and finished goods in return. Control of metal supply routes shapes foreign policy as decisively as any territorial ambition. By the time Tudhaliya's successors hold the throne in the decades approaching 1350 before the Common Era, the transformation is complete. The battered highland kingdom that survived assassination and raid has become something new, a centralized military state with a professional chariot army, a sophisticated diplomatic apparatus, provincial governors administering distant territories, and an ideology of universal kingship. The great king of Hatti now corresponds as an equal with the pharaoh of Egypt, the king of Babylon, the king of Assyria. The stage is set for the man who will exploit this machinery to its fullest. Suppiluliuma, whose campaigns will redraw the map of the ancient world. Suppiluliuma ascends to the throne around 1344 before the Common Era, though the exact year remains debated. He is not the eldest son. His father Tudhaliya III may have intended another successor, and later sources hint that Suppiluliuma seized power through force or political maneuvering, a pattern familiar to Hittite kingship. But whatever shadows attend his accession, the man who emerges into the light of the historical record possesses a strategic mind of extraordinary precision. He inherits the rebuilt military apparatus of the new kingdom and he will wield it with a ruthlessness and vision that no predecessor matched. His target is Mitanni. This Hurrian-ruled kingdom stretching across Upper Mesopotamia and northern Syria has been the Hittites' primary rival for generations, blocking access to the wealthy city-states of the Syrian plain. Suppiluliuma launches his great Syrian campaign around 1340 before the Common Era, a single sustained offensive that reshapes the political geography of the entire Near East. His armies cross the Euphrates, driving deep into Mitanni's sphere of influence. The Mitanni king Tushratta, weakened by internal dissent and abandoned by his Egyptian allies who offer no military support, cannot hold. One by one, the Syrian vassal states that had looked to Mitanni for protection turn their faces toward Hatti. The siege of Carchemish stands as the campaign's crowning achievement. This ancient city commands the primary Euphrates crossing. Whoever holds Carchemish controls the flow of trade and armies between Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and the Levant. Suppiluliuma takes it, and in a stroke of dynastic genius, installs his son Piasili as king there under the throne name Sheri Kushu. Another son, Telepinu, receives the kingdom of Aleppo. The conqueror does not merely defeat his enemies, he plants his bloodline across the conquered territories, binding Syria to Hattusa through family obligation and vassal oath. Then arrives the most extraordinary diplomatic moment in Bronze Age history. A letter reaches Suppiluliuma from Egypt, from the queen herself, possibly the young Ankhesenamun, widow of Tutankhamun. She writes that her husband is dead, that she has no son, and that she refuses to marry a servant. She asks for a Hittite prince to become her husband and Egypt's king. Suppiluliuma, suspicious of so unprecedented an offer, sends an envoy to verify. Months pass. A second letter arrives, the queen now desperate, even angry at his hesitation. Finally convinced, Suppiluliuma dispatches his son Zananza southward toward Egypt. The prince never arrives. He is murdered on the journey, likely by Egyptian court factions unwilling to accept foreign rule. The assassination transforms Suppiluliuma's triumph into fury. He launches retaliatory raids into Egyptian-held territory in southern Syria, and his forces bring back prisoners. Among those captives travels something invisible and devastating: plague. The disease spreads through the Hittite homeland with terrible efficiency, killing soldiers, civilians, and eventually members of the royal family itself. Suppiluliuma dies around 1322 before the Common Era, struck down by the very plague his wars of conquest brought home. His eldest son and immediate successor Arnuwanda II follows him to the grave within a year, claimed by the same pestilence. The empire that Suppiluliuma built, stretching from the Aegean coast to the banks of the Euphrates, administered through vassal kings and royal sons, enforced by the mightiest chariot army west of Assyria, now passes to his younger son, Mursili II, who inherits both an unprecedented domain and a kingdom ravaged by disease. The plague will rage for 20 years. Mursili will compose anguished prayers to the gods, confessing his father's sins, begging for relief. The cost of empire, paid in the currency of contagion, has only begun to be tallied. Mursili II is perhaps 20 years old when the weight of the empire settles upon him. The plague still burns through the cities of Hatti, claiming soldiers and farmers and priests alike. In the archive rooms of Buyukale, scribes press his words into wet clay, prayers of extraordinary anguish addressed to the storm god, to the sun goddess of Arina, to every deity whose anger might explain the pestilence. He confesses sins he did not commit. He acknowledges his father's violation of oaths, the attack on Egyptian territory that may have provoked divine wrath. He begs for the plague to be lifted from the land. These prayers survive among the most personal documents of the ancient world, revealing a young king who governs through crisis with both piety and relentless determination. For despite the plague, Mursili wages war. His annals, composed with unusual narrative precision across 10 years of campaigning, record a methodical reassertion of Hittite power on every frontier. In the west, the kingdom of Arzawa has grown bold during the years of pestilence, its king Uhaziti corresponding directly with Egypt as an equal power. Mursili marches against him around 1316 before the Common Era, shattering Arzawan resistance and fragmenting the territory into smaller vassal states. Mira, the Seha River land, Hapala, each bound by treaty to Hattusa. In the north, the Kaska tribes have again overrun sacred cities. Year after year, Mursili campaigns into their forested highlands, burning settlements, taking prisoners, pushing the frontier back toward the Black Sea coast. His annals record these campaigns with a soldier's precision: distances marched, cities taken, oaths extracted. The military machine he commands has reached extraordinary sophistication. The Hittite chariot differs from its Egyptian counterpart in one critical respect. It carries 3 men rather than 2. A driver grips leather reins attached to a team of 2 horses. A warrior wields a thrusting spear rather than a bow. A shield-bearer protects both. The vehicle itself is heavier than the Egyptian model, built with a rear-mounted axle for stability, its wooden frame wrapped in leather, its 6-spoked wheels designed for the shock of close combat rather than the speed of archery passes. These are not platforms for mobile archers. They are shock weapons designed to crash into enemy formations with the combined weight of men, horses, and momentum. Mursili reigns for approximately 27 years, dying around 1295 before the Common Era. His son Muwatalli II inherits an empire restored, but facing a transformed strategic landscape. Egypt under the 19th dynasty has revived. Seti I has already campaigned into Syria, reasserting pharaonic claims over Kadesh and Amuru, territories the Hittites consider their own. Muwatalli recognizes that the coming confrontation will demand the full resources of the empire. He makes a decision that shocks the traditional establishment. He transfers the royal residence south to Tarhuntasa, closer to the Syrian frontier, leaving his brother Hattusili to govern the northern homeland. The mobilization that follows draws upon every vassal and ally in the Hittite system. Contingents march from western Anatolia, from Arzawa's successor states, from Lucca, from Massa and Karkissa. Syrian vassals at Ugarit, Kadesh, and Aleppo contribute troops and chariots. The army that assembles numbers perhaps 47,000 men and 3,500 chariots, the largest force the Hittite world has ever gathered. They march south through the Bekaa Valley toward the fortified city of Kadesh, on the Orontes, where intelligence reports confirm that Ramesses II advances from the south with 4 divisions bearing the names of gods. The year is 1274 before the Common Era. The 2 greatest powers of the Bronze Age world are converging on a single point beside a river in Syria, and the age of chariot warfare is about to reach its violent crescendo. The city of Kadesh sits upon its tell above the western bank of the Orontes, where the river bends through a broad plain flanked by low ridges. A tributary called the El Arsi joins from the south, creating a natural moat around the fortified mound. It is late May in the year 1274 before the Common Era, and the landscape shimmers under Syrian heat. Behind the city, concealed by the tell itself and screened by woodland along the river bank, Muwatalli II has positioned his chariot force, 3,500 vehicles carrying crews of 3, a driver, a shield-bearer, and a warrior armed with lance and javelin. The main infantry body waits further back, arrayed in disciplined formations drawn from every corner of the Hittite imperial system. Ramesses II approaches from the south with 4 divisions strung along the road in marching column, separated by perhaps 10 kilometers each. The division of Amun leads, followed by the division of Re, then Ptah, and finally Seth bringing up the rear. Egyptian intelligence has failed catastrophically. 2 captured Shasu Bedouin, likely Hittite agents, have told Ramesses that the Hittite army remains far to the north near Aleppo. The pharaoh believes he faces an undefended city. He presses forward with the division of Amun, crosses the Orontes at a ford northwest of Kadesh, and begins establishing camp on the plain. Then the trap springs. As the division of Re marches in loose column across the plain south of Kadesh, still approaching the ford, the Hittite chariot force erupts from concealment east of the river. They cross the Orontes at speed and strike the division of Re on its exposed flank. The impact is devastating. Egyptian infantry, caught in marching order without defensive formation, shatters under the weight of massed chariotry. Soldiers flee northward in panic towards the pharaoh's camp, carrying chaos with them. Within minutes, the routed remnants of the division of Re crash into the half-built Egyptian encampment. Hittite chariots follow close behind, smashing through the camp's perimeter shields. The division of Amun begins to disintegrate. Ramesses finds himself surrounded by collapsing formations, his army fragmenting around him. Egyptian sources describe the pharaoh mounting his chariot with his household guard, the elite Sheridan warriors and royal bodyguard, and charging directly into the Hittite chariots in a desperate counterattack along the camp's western edge. The fighting becomes a swirling melee of chariot against chariot across the trampled camp. Hittite crews, having broken through, lose cohesion as some pause to loot the rich Egyptian baggage train. This momentary disorder allows Ramesses to stabilize a defensive perimeter. Then, from the west, a force of allied troops, the Nearin, possibly a detached Egyptian contingent that had marched separately along the coastal route through Amurru, arrives on the battlefield and strikes the Hittite chariots from an unexpected direction. The combined pressure forces the Hittite chariot force to withdraw back across the Orontes. Muwatalli, observing from the eastern bank, sends fresh chariot waves across the river, but the momentum of surprise has been spent. The fighting continues through the afternoon in repeated charges and withdrawals, neither side able to deliver a killing blow. By evening, the divisions of Ptah and Seth finally arrive from the south, restoring Egyptian numerical strength. The following day sees no renewed general engagement. Muwatalli retains Kadesh and its surrounding territory. His army remains intact, his vassal coalition unbroken. Ramesses withdraws southward, his Syrian campaign abandoned. The tactical reality is a Hittite defensive victory. They have preserved their position and repelled an Egyptian invasion. The strategic result is stalemate. Ramesses returns to Egypt and commissions vast temple reliefs at Abu Simbel, Karnak, and the Ramesseum proclaiming total victory. Muwatalli records no such monumental propaganda, but his control over the contested lands of Amurru and Kadesh remains unchallenged. The border between the two empires settles along a line in central Syria that neither side possesses the strength to alter by force. The age of decisive imperial conquest through single battles has revealed its limits, and a new era of diplomacy will eventually emerge from this bloody equilibrium beside the Orontes. The bloody equilibrium beside the Orontes does not hold without consequence within the Hittite court itself. Muwatalli II dies around 1272 before the Common Era, and the succession fractures along a fault line that has threatened Hatti since its earliest days. His son Urhi-Teshub takes the throne as Mursili III, but he is young, inexperienced, and immediately challenged by his uncle, Hattusili, brother of the dead king, a seasoned military commander who has governed the northern frontier against the Kaska for decades. For 7 years the tension builds. Hattusili commands loyal troops, controls wealthy provinces, and possesses the political cunning his nephew lacks. Around 1267 before the Common Era, Hattusili marches against his own nephew, defeats him, and seizes the throne. Urhi-Teshub is exiled, first to internal banishment, then eventually fleeing to Egypt itself, where he becomes a diplomatic irritant between the two great powers for years to come. Hattusili III rules as a usurper who knows he must legitimize his reign through achievement rather than bloodline alone. He turns to diplomacy with a sophistication unprecedented in the ancient world. By 1259 before the Common Era, 16 years after the carnage at Kadesh, Hittite and Egyptian envoys exchange drafts of a comprehensive peace treaty. The final version is inscribed on a silver tablet, now lost, but clay copies survive in the archives of Hattusa, and a hieroglyphic version adorns temple walls at Karnak. The terms are remarkable in their modernity. Mutual non-aggression, a defensive military alliance obligating each power to aid the other against external attack, extradition clauses for political refugees, and an amnesty provision ensuring returned fugitives face no punishment. 1,000 gods of Hatti and 1,000 gods of Egypt stand as divine witnesses, their names catalogued in solemn lists that bind heaven itself to the agreement. The treaty transforms the geopolitical landscape of the eastern Mediterranean. A Hittite princess, whose Egyptian name becomes Ma-thorn-Ferur, travels south to marry Ramesses II around 1245 before the Common Era, cementing the alliance in royal blood. Correspondence flows between the courts with unprecedented warmth. Queen Puduhepa, wife of Hattusili, writes directly to Ramesses as an equal, negotiating terms, discussing the princess's dowry, even chiding the pharaoh for delays. Her seal, showing her embraced by the goddess Hebat, appears on international correspondence, marking her as co-ruler in all but title. No other ancient queen leaves such a substantial diplomatic archive. Within Hatti itself, Hattusili and Puduhepa pour resources into religious life. The rock sanctuary of Yazilikaya, cut into limestone outcrops barely 2 kilometers from Hattusa's walls, reaches its final monumental form during their reign. In the larger chamber, 63 deities process in carved relief along the living rock, gods marching from the left, goddesses from the right, converging where the storm god Teshub meets the sun goddess of Arena. In the narrow inner chamber, 12 identical gods march in a row, figures associated with the underworld. while a massive relief shows the god Sharuma embracing King Tudhaliya IV, Hattusili's son and eventual successor. The sanctuary serves not merely as temple, but as cosmic map. The entire Hittite pantheon ordered in hierarchical procession, Hurrian and Hatti deities merged into a single theological system. The great festivals structure the imperial year. The Ayan Ta Shum festival stretches across 38 days in spring, requiring the king and queen to visit multiple temple complexes, performing rituals that ensure agricultural fertility. The Ki.Lam festival in autumn celebrates economic prosperity, with processions of craftsmen and merchants before the royal pair. These are not mere ceremonies, but constitutional obligations. A king who fails to perform the festivals risks divine abandonment of the state itself. Hattusili understands this intimately. His legitimacy rests not on inheritance, but on divine favor, and he claims the goddess Ishtar of Samuha personally ordained his kingship. The 1,000 gods of Hatti, Hurrian, Hatti, Luwian, Mesopotamian deities absorbed across centuries of imperial expansion, form a theological commonwealth as diverse as the empire itself, bound together in ritual cycles that make the king priest, administrator, and divine intermediary in a single sacred office. But beneath the sacred canopy of ritual and diplomacy, beneath the king's festivals and the queen's correspondence, there exists another world entirely, the world of those who grow the grain, weave the cloth, tend the flocks, and shape the bronze that makes empire possible. Across the Anatolian plateau, in villages of mud brick and timber clustered along river terraces and sheltered valleys, 2 to 3 million people live out their lives under the authority of Hattusa, most of them never seeing the capital's great walls. The plateau itself dictates the rhythm of existence. At elevations of 800 to 1,200 meters, winters arrive harsh and early. Rainfall is modest, perhaps 300 to 400 millimeters annually across the central steppe, and agriculture depends on careful timing. Farmers plant emmer wheat and barley in autumn, watching the winter snows that will provide spring moisture. Orchards of apple, pear, and grape cluster in the warmer valleys. Cattle, sheep, and goats graze the upland pastures in summer, returning to lower ground before the first frosts. The empire's food supply exists perpetually on a margin, and a single failed harvest can trigger crisis across entire provinces. The Hittite law code, preserved on tablets from the scribal archives, reveals a society governed with remarkable precision. 200 articles regulate nearly every dimension of human interaction. A free man who breaks another's arm pays 20 shekels of silver. If the victim is a slave, the compensation drops to 10. The price of an ox, a sheep, a house, a vineyard, all are fixed. Wages for seasonal laborers are specified. A harvester earns half a shekel of silver per month, a plowman somewhat more. These are not abstract principles, but practical regulations enforced by local officials across the provinces, adjudicated by courts that hear testimony and weigh evidence. Women hold legal standing unusual for the Bronze Age world. A wife may initiate divorce, a woman may own property, inherit land, and conduct business in her own name. Widows retain control of their households. The laws address marriage payments, bride prices, and the rights of children born to unions between free persons and slaves with careful distinction. A slave who accumulates enough wealth may purchase freedom, a provision that acknowledges social mobility even at the empire's lowest tier. The road network binds this world together. Routes radiate from Hattusa south through the Taurus passes toward Syria, west toward the Azawa lands and the Aegean coast, east toward the upper Euphrates. Way stations provide shelter and fresh animals for royal messengers carrying sealed tablets. Merchant caravans move copper from Cypriot mines, tin from sources far to the east, textiles woven in Anatolian workshops, and grain from wherever surplus exists to wherever shortage threatens. The state controls strategic commodities, metals above all, while local markets handle everyday exchange of pottery, foodstuffs, leather goods, and timber. In the craft quarters of provincial towns, bronze smiths work bellows over charcoal furnaces, casting axe heads, chisels, and the fittings for chariots. Potters shape storage vessels, great pithoi standing waist-high, their interiors sealed with pitch to hold grain or oil through the winter months. Weavers produce woolen textiles on upright looms, their output measured and taxed by palace administrators who record quantities on clay tablets in the same cuneiform script used for royal treaties. Apprentices learn their trades under master craftsmen, bound by agreements that specify duration of service and the obligations of both parties. Bread and beer form the foundation of daily sustenance. Women grind grain on saddle querns each morning, mixing flour with water and baking flatbreads in domed clay ovens. Beer, brewed from barley and flavored with various additives, accompanies every meal and every ritual offering. The great temple storerooms at Hattusa hold thousands of pithoi, enough grain and oil to sustain the religious establishment and provide emergency reserves for the capital's population. When those reserves fail, as they increasingly do in the empire's final century, the king must write to foreign powers begging shipments of grain, a humiliation that reveals how thin the margin between imperial grandeur and catastrophe truly remains across this high, wind-scoured land. Tudalia IV ascends to the throne around 1237 before the Common Era, inheriting an empire that still stretches from the Aegean littoral to the Euphrates bend, yet one whose sinews have begun to fray in ways his predecessors never faced simultaneously. His father Hattusili III secured peace with Egypt and diplomatic prestige abroad, but the internal contradictions, contested succession, restive vassals, hostile frontiers, have only deepened. The new king is energetic, ambitious, a builder and a warrior, yet the forces arraying against him will prove greater than any single ruler can contain. The first crisis erupts in the east. Assyria under Tukulti-Ninurta I has grown from a regional power into an aggressive empire, hungry for the trade routes and copper sources that Hatti controls. Around 1237, Hittite and Assyrian forces clash at Nihria, somewhere in the upper Tigris region. The battle ends in Hittite defeat, a shocking reversal for a military machine that has dominated the Near East for over a century. Tudalia responds not with renewed campaigns, but with economic warfare, imposing a trade embargo against Assyria, forbidding vassal states from allowing Assyrian merchants passage. Letters recovered from Ugarit confirm this blockade, revealing a king who understands that commerce can wound as deeply as bronze spear points. In western Anatolia, the Luka lands, a loosely organized region along the southern coast, resist imperial authority with increasing boldness. Tudalia campaigns against them, but these are not centralized kingdoms that can be defeated in a single battle. They are dispersed communities, maritime raiders, populations that melt into mountain valleys and reappear along coastal waters. The western frontier bleeds resources without resolution. At Hattusa itself, Tudalia builds with extraordinary ambition. The southern fortification circuit expands to encompass the upper city, creating a walled perimeter stretching nearly 6 kilometers. The Yerkapi rampart rises, a massive artificial glacis of earth faced with stone, pierced by an underground postern tunnel 70 meters long, emerging beyond the walls for sorties or ritual processions. New temples proliferate across the upper city, more than 24 constructed during this period, their storerooms designed to hold the grain reserves upon which the capital depends. The rock sanctuary at Yazilikaya receives its final carved program, the great divine procession of gods and goddesses meeting in sacred assembly, the 12 gods of the underworld marching in pointed caps, the protective embrace of the god Sharuma around the king himself. This is theology rendered in living stone, a statement of cosmic order at precisely the moment when earthly order trembles. Yet the granaries cannot fill themselves. Climate data drawn from tree rings and lake sediments across the eastern Mediterranean suggests prolonged drought gripping the region from roughly 1250 onward, intensifying through the century's final decades. The Anatolian plateau, always marginal for agriculture, suffers acutely. Letters from this period reveal desperate requests, grain shipments from Egypt, emergency provisions from Ugarit. One tablet declares it a matter of life and death. The empire that once exported surplus now begs for sustenance. The succession question festers as well. Tudalia's cousin Kurunta, son of Muwatalli II, holds the appanage kingdom of Tarhuntasa in southern Anatolia. A remarkable bronze tablet, discovered in 1986 near Hattusa's Sphinx Gate, records the treaty between them, granting Kurunta extensive autonomy, territorial rights, and exemptions from tribute. Whether Kurunta later attempted to seize the throne remains debated, but seal impressions bearing his name with the title Great King have been found at Hattusa itself, suggesting a moment of usurpation or at minimum a direct challenge to Tudalia's authority. The empire holds, but barely. Its military has suffered defeat against Assyria. Its western provinces resist control. Its agricultural base withers under relentless drought. Its dynastic stability depends on fragile agreements with ambitious relatives. Ships carry grain across the Mediterranean from Egypt and the Levantine coast, their cargoes representing not trade, but survival. The massive walls Tudalia raises around his capital speak not of confidence but of a kingdom turning inward, fortifying against threats it can no longer project power to meet at a distance. The storm gathers from every direction at once. Tudalia IV dies around 1215 before the Common Era, and the throne passes through brief, obscure hands before reaching the last great king whose name echoes the empire's founder. Suppiluliuma II takes power in a world already unraveling. The grain ships from Egypt arrive less frequently now. Letters from the coastal vassal at Ugarit carry an edge of desperation, reporting unknown fleets sighted off the Levantine shore, raiders burning coastal settlements, populations fleeing inland. The international system that sustained Hittite power for 2 centuries, the web of treaties, trade routes, tin shipments from the east, copper from Alasia, frays at every node simultaneously. Suppiluliuma II fights. An inscription carved into the Sudberg chamber at Hattusa records what may be the first naval battle in documented history. Hittite forces engage enemy ships off the coast of Al-Ashir, modern Cyprus, and claim victory. The king burns the enemy fleet and captures crews on the shore. This is no minor skirmish. It represents the empire projecting maritime power it had never previously needed, fighting an enemy at sea because the old land-based strategies no longer suffice. The identity of these attackers remains uncertain. They may be among the peoples Egyptian sources call the Sea Peoples, Peliset, Cheka, Shekelesh, Denian, groups whose origins scholars still debate, migrants and raiders driven by the same systemic pressures crushing every eastern Mediterranean state. But naval victories cannot feed a starving heartland. The Anatolian plateau, already strained by decades of drought, can no longer sustain the capital's population. The massive granaries within Hattusa's walls stand increasingly empty. Letters between Hittite officials and foreign courts reveal the crisis in plain language. Requests for emergency grain shipments, pleas that carry the weight of state survival. The last known letter from the king of Ugarit to a Hittite official reports enemy ships attacking. The city's army deployed far away in Hittite service, the fleet sent to Luka lands. Ugarit burns around 1185 before the Common Era and is never reoccupied. At Hattusa itself, the archaeological evidence tells a complex story. The great temples in the lower city show signs of deliberate abandonment before destruction. Valuable cult statues appear to have been removed. Administrative archives were left behind, but portable wealth largely was not. This pattern suggests the ruling elite understood what was coming, a systematic evacuation rather than a sudden catastrophe. The population dispersed, perhaps southward toward Tarhuntasa, perhaps eastward toward the surviving provincial centers. Then fire came. The destruction layer across Hattusa dates to approximately 1180 before the Common Era. Charred roof timbers collapsed onto floors. Mud brick walls calcified in intense heat. The Lion Gate, the Sphinx Gate, the great temple of the storm god, all consumed. The collapse is not uniquely Hittite. Within a single generation, Mycenaean palace civilization disintegrates across Greece. The Kassite dynasty falls in Babylon. Egyptian power retreats permanently from the Levant after Ramesses III's desperate battles against the Sea Peoples around 1177. Trade networks that moved tin from Afghanistan to the Aegean simply cease to function. The interconnected Bronze Age world, where the failure of one node cascades through the entire system, experiences total systemic breakdown. Drought, migration, warfare, disrupted trade, internal rebellion, no single cause suffices. The Sea Peoples are symptom as much as cause, themselves refugees from collapsing societies seeking new lands by force. The cuneiform tradition at Hattusa ends absolutely. No more tablets are inscribed, no more festivals celebrated. No more king's process through the sacred gates to Yazilikaya. The 1,000 gods of Hatti fall silent in their roofless temples. Wind carries ash across the empty citadel of Büyükkale, where generations of kings administered an empire. The great walls, built to withstand siege, stand guard over nothing. Hattusa becomes a ruin on a wind-swept ridge, its name forgotten by the peoples who will eventually settle nearby. The empire that rivaled Egypt, that pioneered international diplomacy, that governed through law and treaty rather than terror alone, passes from living memory into the long silence of buried stone. But the silence is not absolute, not everywhere, not for everyone. In southeastern Anatolia and across northern Syria, fragments of the Hittite world endure. At Carchemish on the Euphrates, where Suppiluliuma I once installed his son as viceroy, a dynasty continues to rule. The city's massive walls still stand. Its scribes still carve inscriptions, not in cuneiform on clay, but in Luwian hieroglyphs cut into basalt. The storm god still receives offerings. The artistic traditions persist in carved orthostats, showing lions, sphinxes, and royal processions that echo the imperial style of Hattusa, transformed now by local Syrian influences into something new, yet recognizably descended from the old empire. Carchemish is the most powerful of these successor states, but it is not alone. At Melid, modern Malatya, another kingdom preserves Hittite royal traditions along the upper Euphrates. At Tabal in the central plateau, at Quer in Cilicia, at Gurgum, at Kumu, at Patin, a constellation of small kingdoms stretches across the landscape where the empire once held unified dominion. Their rulers bear names drawn from the old Hittite royal tradition. Their monuments display the winged sun disk. Their gods descend from the 1,000 gods of Hatti, blended now with Aramean and local Syrian deities. For 5 centuries these Neo-Hittite kingdoms persist, trading, warring among themselves, forming alliances, paying tribute when pressed. They speak Luwian, the sister language that had grown alongside Nesali throughout the imperial period, and now outlives it. Their hieroglyphic inscriptions, carved on stone stelae, on city gates, on rock faces, constitute the living continuation of Hittite literate culture long after the cuneiform archives fell silent at Boaz-Koi. But Assyria rises in the east. Through the 9th and 8th centuries before the Common Era, Assyrian armies press westward. One by one, the Neo-Hittite kingdoms submit, resist, and fall. Carchemish, the greatest of them, endures until 717 before the Common Era, when Sargon II conquers it and incorporates its territory into the Assyrian provincial system. The last political descendants of the Hittite world vanish into the administrative machinery of a new empire, yet memory persists in unexpected forms. The Hebrew Bible mentions the Hittites, Bnei Het, children of Heth, as inhabitants of Canaan. Uriah the Hittite serves King David. These biblical references, however garbled by centuries of transmission, preserve an echo of a people whose imperial power had once shaped the entire Near Eastern world. Then comes forgetting, deep, complete forgetting. For over 2,000 years, the Hittites exist only in those scattered biblical verses, their empire entirely unknown to scholarship. The mound of Boaz-Koi sits quietly in the central Turkish highlands, its buried tablets undisturbed beneath meters of accumulated earth and collapsed mud brick. In 1834, the French traveller Charles Texier visits the ruins and recognizes their monumental scale without understanding their origin. Decades of speculation follow. Then, in 1906, the German Assyriologist Hugo Winkler begins systematic excavation at Boaz-Koi and unearths over 10,000 cuneiform tablets from the Royal Archive, treaties, laws, rituals, annals, correspondence. The Hittite Empire emerges from the earth almost intact in documentary form. 9 years later, the Czech linguist Bedřich Hrozný demonstrates that the Hittite language belongs to the Indo-European family, revolutionizing understanding of ancient language migration and cultural contact. Excavations continue to the present day, each season revealing new tablets, new structures, new understanding. The civilization that vanished so completely around 1180 before the Common Era now stands restored to its proper place among the great powers of the ancient world. Its legacy endures in specific, tangible forms. A replica of the Kadesh peace treaty hangs in the United Nations headquarters in New York, a symbol of humanity's oldest known diplomatic agreement between equal powers. The Hittite sun disk appears in modern Turkish civic symbolism, connecting a contemporary nation to its deepest Anatolian roots. The principles embedded in Hittite governance, treaty-based international relations, codified law, religious pluralism within imperial structures, resonate across millennia as foundations of practices the modern world still employs. The wind still crosses the ridge at Hattusa. The lion gates still stand, worn by 32 centuries of weather. The stones remember what was built here, and what was lost, and what patient scholarship has returned to human knowledge from the long silence of buried earth. Thank you for joining this journey through the rise and fall of the Hittite Empire. If these stories of the ancient world resonate, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new exploration into the civilizations that shaped our shared past.